We're here today talking about a very hot topic. Last Sunday, 9 o'clock.
Brazen daylight robbery in the world's largest museum.
Dramatic new footage has emerged of Sunday morning's heist here at the Louvre Museum.
They broke the window and then headed towards several display cases where they stole jewelry.
There's a little summary of what has been stolen.
Yes, 6.72 million.
Oh my God. And it's only one brush. The fact that the museum is spending so much money. How can they even afford that?
You know, I was there at 9 a.m. a week before it happened on a Sunday. And I can tell you, there was, at first when I arrived, those galleries are empty. I mean, I was the only person who wasn't a guard in there. And I've also noticed that the way that it's reported in the press that there were 5 guards in the room or adjacent galleries, I think that this bigger problem within the museum of there being there have been sort of rumors that there was a problem with the security system on that window that had been reported 2 weeks prior. And then it was said that it had been fixed. But it seems quite curious to me that that would have been the window that they came in. I also, when I started looking more into the jewels, I realized that the crown of Louis XV did not have actual gems in it. It has glass. And they knew not to take that. So then you have this sort of incredible amount of research that's going in, perhaps in their grab. That seems insane to me because, of course, there's DNA on that. You're not going to be able to sell the Mona Lisa, to sell the Nike. You know, those things are just... One, they're super difficult to get out. This is basically a smash and grab. It's easier to get into that gallery and rob it than it is to get into Cartier. Was it 1976 that same gallery was robbed by using a scaffolding?
So there was a robbery in that same gallery in 1976 already?
My name is Carolyn H, and I am an art historian and a curator. And then in terms of working in an institution in France, it gets so big in the mind of Parisians, the French, beyond anyone who's gone to the museum. It's sort of courageous, extraordinary. Absolutely.
We're here today talking about a very hot topic. And we were supposed to be there last Sunday, 9 o'clock.
Yes.
How would you describe the heist, the most extraordinary, the most hilarious? We've heard many things.
I mean, to use an absurd word, but it's sort of bombastic. It's outrageous. It's extraordinary. Absolutely.
I love the word bombastic.
Because it feels explosive, right? I mean, kind of exploded after it happened. It's been so big. I think it's so big in the mind of Parisians, the French, beyond anyone who's gone to the museum.
Do you recall of any other such event which had that magnitude?
Yes, but I think that it was more for me because I grew up in Boston.
Okay.
But the Gardner Museum heist, but maybe it didn't have sort of as broad a reach because it was in Boston and Massachusetts and not in Paris, which is right now seems like the center of the world. So certainly the cultural world at the moment.
I think it's time to introduce yourself.
Okay.
So,
My name is Carolyn H, and I'm an art historian and a curator. I worked at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. I was also on the board of the American Friends of the Louvre, so it's a museum that I do hold close to my heart.
and there's many people talking and addressing this question from a perspective of security, politics, economics, but we wanted to address it from a perspective of an art curator. Maybe we can start from understanding the art curator's role in the museum and why actually that matters in the conversation of the Louvre heist.
Although I know many of the curators who work now in the Louvre, I have to sort of preface this by saying I am not a curator there, or I was never a curator there. And because it is a state-run system, it does have its unique sort of problems, challenges, but also advantages. And I can't speak specifically to those, but I do think that generally any good curator looks at their job as sort of being the intellectual and ethical steward of the collection. They research, they preserve, and they interpret the works of art. They shape the way that they're understood by the public. But they also, they decide sort of what is displayed, how it's contextualized, how it connects to broader histories and ideas. But I think what's at the core of that is always about care.
In some of the reports that I've read, who have challenged the aesthetic versus security questions of how the jewels were displayed in the Apollo Gallery, what goes behind that decision when you are an art curator?
I would guess that the gallery was restored in 2019, 2020, and they put these jewels into new cases. In fact, they moved, I think, every jewel that was stolen from a different gallery into this gallery. I cannot imagine that security wasn't discussed. And I would guess that when we've heard about these sort of complaints by the security guards, that there weren't enough of them in the room, which, for example, I was there at 9 a.m. a week before it happened on a Sunday. And I can tell you there was, at first when I arrived, and maybe it was about 9:15 by the time I got to that gallery, there was one guard in the room and then a second guard came in. So, and I've also noticed that the way that it's reported in the press that there were 5 guards in the room or adjacent galleries. So I think that this bigger problem within the museum of there being not enough staffing also has a sort of a big part to play in this. And I would guess that the complaints were coming from the curators and the security staff. That aside, I don't think that a curator would have any ability to ensure that there was better glass on the walls or that on the windows, or that there were bars on the windows.
How would you describe the logic behind their positioning in the room? Could you comment on that?
Originally, before 2020 or 2019, there were only sort of antique looking, I think they were 19th century cases in the gallery. And they changed those cases. And I think they actually did it very well because they don't interrupt the feeling of being in this extraordinary 17th century gallery. And even though they look incredibly modern, knowing the fact that, what year was it? Was it 1976? That same gallery was robbed by using a scaffolding, and that a diamond-encrusted sword was stolen out of one of those cases. I mean, not the cases that were there since 2020, but the previous cases. I would have thought that they would have considered that more seriously, so that the windows would have been, and that the cases wouldn't have been so sort of easy to get into. But again, I can't speak to that because I don't know the details of the fabrication of the case.
So there was a robbery in that same gallery in 1976 already?
Mm-hmm. And they used a scaffolding to get up to that same floor.
So they've used exactly the same way to get in exactly the same gallery as they did.
Yes.
The Sunday.
I can't confirm it was the exact same window, but it was certainly the exact same method on the exact same side of the Louvre and in the exact same gallery. I know. One would think that this would have been something that they would have considered. And just in a little bit of research that I've done, I think that the key is that you try and once they you make it hard for them once they've broken in. So it's really a time game. So you don't want to make it easy for it to be broken into in a short amount of time. So from that perspective, then could a curator kind of say, okay, we want to put them against the walls, or we want them secured against the walls, which perhaps could have made them more secure. They are they look beautiful in the center of the room. I think the presentation is stunning, but perhaps it's a little bit easier to.
But in the conversation between an art curator and security team of a museum, surely that security comes first and aesthetic normally comes second.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have been talking about Louvre for several months now. We were preparing a piece which was initiated by you, talking about the only way of getting the only efficient or the most optimized way to get
Truly,
to
I think to me, it's actually the only way to visit the Louvre right now, given the current state of the institution.
We were supposed to be at the Louvre on Sunday, the same Sunday of the heist.
Yes.
Our rendezvous was 9:00 in the morning. You have done the same tour of the Louvre to see if you have found the optimal way to get there, the optimal time, and the optimal day. Can you give us some background as to your research? How difficult or easy it was? Because literally you ended up with exactly the same day and time
I know, which is
in a bizarre ways.
exactly because I was trying to find the best time to visit the institution. When can you be there and not have throngs of people? And when is there the least chance that a gallery is going to be closed that you're planning on going to, which is certainly on the weekend. And certainly if you go at 9 a.m., those galleries are empty. I mean, I had the Apollo Gallery to myself. I was the only one and the only person who wasn't a guard in there.
The Louvre is facing so many challenges that the closure of the gallery is something which can happen randomly and very spontaneously.
Absolutely. And the map is poor. They supposedly post when the galleries are closed on the map, and also they post it on the website, but that's never actually true. And I, who visit museums a lot, was unable to then figure out using the map how to get around that problem. So what I ultimately realized was that the museum basically caters to this masterpiece tour, and that the only way to do it is to go at 9 a.m., which I actually heard from a curator at the Louvre told me that this is the time to go, which is in itself, makes you think that someone from within the Louvre could have told these robbers.
Having done this research, how easy or difficult do you think it was for those who are responsible for the heist to find out all of that information? The reason I'm asking is that the equipment which was used was apparently extremely basic, and the way they got in and out was very basic. I'm trying to understand, was it really a very experienced team who probably spent loads of time researching and understanding which gallery to go to, how to get there, or it's information which is rather accessible and you just need time, but it's publicly available?
I vacillate between thinking that they are highly skilled, that they were highly skilled or are, and that they weren't, because I think that there's this sort of strange mix between them knowing exactly what they're sort of going for and being able to know the right window in the museum, because again, I don't know if this is definitely true or not, but there have been sort of rumors that there was a problem with the security system on that window that had been reported 2 weeks prior. And then it was said that it had been fixed. But it seems quite curious to me that would have been the window that they came in. It's hard to say. Then I also, when I started looking more into the jewels, I realized that the crown of Louis XV did not have actual gems in it. It has glass. And they knew not to take that. So then you have this sort of incredible amount of research that's going in, perhaps in their grab. But then at the same time, as you say, it seemed very basic. I mean, gasoline and then like leaving their gilets jaunes and, sort of that seems insane to me because of course there's DNA on that. So I don't know. I would say they definitely did a fair amount of research on the museum, but their methods were quite rudimentary.
As an art curator, if you were to consult, I mean, that sounds bizarre, on the heist.
Dude, yes.
Would you have gone into their Polo gallery, or you would have chosen a different gallery in terms of value? I think as an art curator, you work with a lot of collectors.
No question, if you are a rote sort of thief and you want to come in and steal gems that you ultimately can use, I think, to sell, to be able to trade on the market, this is a great way to do it. So it's going to be a lot harder to get into Cartier and a lot easier to get into the Louvre. And then if you get into the Louvre, you don't want to steal the Mona Lisa because that's impossible to sell. But you have options with when you have masses of diamonds on a setting.
So it's bombastic from a perspective of not only the size and the publicity, but from the brilliance of actually being able to get into that gallery, how open it was vis-a-vis access, but also how optimal it was in terms of the items you would grab and potentially be able to dispose of on the market.
Absolutely.
It sounds like it was optimized for someone to do that without actually optimizing it.
I mean, if they really are just sort of low-level crooks, it is their moment of absolute brilliance.
Let's go into the question of what was stolen. This is just a little summary of what has been stolen.
Yes.
Can we start with the history of those jewels?
Absolutely. I think what's fascinating and what hasn't been discussed as much in the press is that the only jewels that were stolen were Napoleonic. So either belonged to the empire of Napoleon I or Napoleon III. And there's a slight sort of a exception in that, which we can talk about later, where some of the gems actually came from an earlier monarch. We talked about the fact that they did know that the Bourbon crown had glass in it, or we guess, but they also skipped a 60 million euro single diamond, the Regent diamond, that belonged to Louis XIV. There might have been a reason why they, decided to sort of take just an absolute sort of financial reason why they decided to take the gems that they did. But it's incredibly striking that they are only from Napoleon's empire, I think, particularly in this moment. And I think it's also interesting that after the empire of Napoleon III collapsed, at the Third Republic, in this moment of sort of absolutely hating any images of monarchy or empire, because of course Napoleon comes in and he promises that he's not that, but he then very, very much becomes and embodies this idea of absolute ruler. And so they sold nearly all of the crown jewels in 1887. And then what's been happening is after they were sold, the Louvre has been trying to buy back these gems. The most recent purchase was of that brooch, which was in 2008, which is purchased through the American, I think just the Ami de Louvre. Exactly.
Do you know about the theft of the Duke of Wellington's portrait?
No.
Okay, love that story. A 61-year-old retired bus driver from Newcastle. He says that he borrowed, but officially he stole the portrait of the Duke of Wellington after learning that the government has spent 140,000 on buying back this portrait for the National Museum. And he was then writing letters to the government demanding that they create a fund for elderly to give them free TV licenses. He was never charged with stealing the portrait. He was only charged with stealing the frame, a national legend symbolizing British eccentricity and class protest. So he stole something protesting, like, for the good of the people. We didn't talk about a turn of events like this, but you speaking about the fact that the French government have been buying back, and actually, how much did they spend on buying back the jewels? over time.
2008, fascinating. The knot brooch was acquired. So let's find out how much that was acquired for. Sold in the 1887 sale, $6.72 million.
Could this be an act of rebellion considering all the economical and political questions that France is facing right now? Could this actually be a class action?
I think without a doubt. And when I was thinking about these new questions that you asked last night, I really thought that that was possible. But why do you buy something like that when your gallery needs the security and the rest of the works within that gallery are not safe? I mean, that to me is a very big question. And there have been acquisitions since that are of very large amounts of money. Why do you choose that?
I think there are some discrepancies or some things that indeed we don't understand yet. Budget holes, I don't know how we can call them.
No, certainly. And priorities. I mean, often the acquisitions are coming through the friends. They're coming through donors. But equally, I don't know why you couldn't sort of move that towards the redoing of a gallery.
It's not a turn of events that we could have expected, but it certainly did happen in the history of art.
No, it can't be ruled out. And I think it's really interesting to bring that case up. And we're going to see, right? It's a wait and see. If you were just a curator, and you decided to look for symbolism in this, like if this was a painting, it's ripe with symbolism and sort of allegory. And so it's fascinating from that perspective. It's really extraordinary. If in this moment you wanted to go at the heart of the current government, it's quite a way to do it. Because I think that you have Macron, who has allied himself in many ways, I think, with Napoleon. His speech after he won the election in the court, Napoleon at the Louvre. He has laid a wreath on the anniversary of Napoleon's death. I think that, he's at many times sort of talked about and mentioned him. And then I think there's also this kind of, the press links him in some ways because Napoleon comes in as this very democratic leader in that he's going to create the republic, that it's very much about the people. And then ultimately, more and more, he's becoming one of the many autocrats that exist. You're reading the French press. And then as he's aligned himself with this museum also, and has taken on this new Renaissance project, which many people are incredibly upset about, where it's 900 million, mainly going to the museum for new entrants, new access to the Mona Lisa, not necessarily going to those departments that need them, or these galleries that need security and things like that, or to the curatorial departments, with kind of all of this linking to go and to steal the jewels from the family of Napoleon in this moment where he's linked himself to this museum. It must be an absolute dagger in the heart. And then they're wearing the yellow vests as they go in.